Happy Monday and welcome to another episode of Brain Scratch, Case Cracked. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Of course, Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery and what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery. But Brain Scratchers, before we start today's show, we have an update, and this one is a little unusual. We aren't usually able to give updates on Case Cracked stories, but with this one, we have a confession that fills in some of the gaps. That's if you believe the words of losing streak Lois, the Minnesota wife and grandmother who murdered her husband, and a woman in Florida before assuming her second victim's identity. Lois then stopped at every casino she came to and gambled her victim's money away. I'll have the original episode linked in the description box below. But you may recall that Lois was apprehended in Texas in what seemed to be another attempt at taking a woman's life and assuming her identity. Lois was extradited back to Florida to face charges there and pled guilty to the first-degree murder of Pamela Hutchinson and will be serving a life sentence in that case. But no one could ever figure out what precipitated the murder of her first victim, her husband. Well, in an August 11th hearing, she pled guilty, and according to Fox 9 News, quote, Lois told the court that her husband handed her the loaded firearm on March 11th, 2018. They were fighting, and Lois said David told her to go and kill herself and to get it right this time. Lois said she had tried to end her own life in the past, but this time she turned the gun at him and fired directly at his heart. Lois said once she realized David was dead, she laid down alongside him, closed his eyes, and covered him in a blanket. This started the crime spree and manhunt that crossed several state lines and caused so much more heartache for other families. Do you believe her story? On today's mystery, which comes all the way from Sweden, it really teaches us that you can never be too careful with the life of your child. This is a case we call Lisa's Last Call. On June 7th, 2015, Lisa Holmes's day was ending like any other. The 17-year-old Scovda resident had been working at a little cafe in Blomberg. Lisa had recently graduated high school and as a present had been given a new moped. That evening, at 6:23 p.m., she texted her father to say that the cafe was closing and she was about to make the hour-long ride home. This would be the first time she made the trip all on her own. For weeks, her father had patiently driven behind her as she made her way to and from work so that she could become more comfortable with the drive. It also allowed her parents a little bit less worry before they cut her loose and let her go on her own. Right after he received the text, a telephone call came through to their house phone. It seemed like a pocket dial. He could hear the muffled conversation of Lisa with her co-workers as they left for the evening. Hearing nothing out of the ordinary, he and his wife waited for their daughter to make it home. But an hour later, Lisa had still not made it home and wasn't answering her cell phone. Fearing their daughter had broken down, or even worse, her father began to make the drive to the cafe, checking the road for any signs of his daughter. As he neared the end of his drive, seeing no signs of Lisa, he was somewhat relieved when he pulled up to the cafe and saw his daughter's moped sitting outside. He could clearly see that the cafe was closed and locked, but where was Lisa? The keys were in the moped, but her helmet was not hanging from the handle as she usually left it. When the cafe owner was called, she opened the business for them to search. They also searched the area around the cafe, but they found no trace of Lisa. Knowing that something was terribly wrong, her father immediately called the police. Working on the assumption that Lisa had been kidnapped, investigators hoped to keep ahead of the situation and find the girl unharmed by starting their searches immediately. There was a lot of ground to cover, so they brought in a tracking dog to help eliminate potential search areas. Although the dog picked up her scent in the area around the cafe, still no sign of her was found. Other officers began knocking on doors in the neighborhood, questioning residents in the hope of finding someone who saw her. As officers continued to knock on doors, the owner of a nearby farm called Blomberg's Manor reported that workers on his grounds had found a moped glove in a barn that both police and Lisa's father had already searched. This man also owned the cafe Lisa worked at. Her parents were able to identify the glove as one worn by their daughter when she rode. Officers now strongly suspected that Lisa had not disappeared of her own volition, but had been taken. On June 9th, police held a press conference asking for the public to come forward with any knowledge in this case. Even though leads were coming in and being followed up on, none were really panning out. That evening, while officers searched a stretch of dirt road near the cafe, they found a shattered cell phone screen, and they identified that it was from the cell phone belonging to Lisa. Later, they also found her driver's license, a subway card from New York, and her keys. Now they finally had a decent lead. After finding a pair of earrings that belonged to Lisa in the very same barn that had already been searched, on June 10th, investigators not only expanded their search of the dirt road, but also brought in the help of Sweden's nonprofit organization Missing People to aid in the effort. This started the largest missing person search ever for missing people in Sweden, seeing about 1,000 volunteers applying to help. Later that day, further down the road, another piece of Lisa's phone, her Visa card, and 2 receipts were located. Officers ended their day by finding Lisa's mobile phone case. Next, investigators tracked her cell phone, which showed no use after her text and call to her father. They also questioned her friends and family further. By June 12th, Lisa's family had searched, talked to the press, and did everything else they could think of to find her. Her classmates had set up a memorial site that was being visited by friends and family, and countless volunteers continued to search the area. That day, a group from Missing People decided to search not just the area of the barn, but the estate that was attached to it named Martorp. As the group drove onto the property, they were met by Nerijus Belevicius and his brother, 2 Lithuanian men who worked and lived on the farm. They insisted that the area had already been searched and cleared by police. This made the group's representatives suspicious. They knew the area hadn't been searched yet and decided to call police in for help. After officers arrived, they were allowed to search the area, and on top of a rice mound at the back of the property, they found Lisa's jacket and helmet. Not far from that site, searchers found a partially clothed woman's body stuffed into a clothes locker in a work shed. With heavy hearts, officers transported her body back to headquarters to be identified. Through tears, Lisa's family confirmed that it was indeed their daughter. This terrible discovery ended the 5-day search. An autopsy found that Lisa had died the night she disappeared. Her abductor covered her mouth and eyes with tape before tying a rope around her neck. That night, the town lit candles in a vigil to honor Lisa and her family. Officers immediately arrested Nerijus and his brother on suspicion of murder. Nerijus's wife had also been taken into custody under suspicion of protecting and harboring a criminal. Surprisingly, the 3 might not have come under any suspicion at all if they had not tried to stop the search of the property. Evidence showed that Nerijus's DNA was found on pieces of rope used to hang Lisa. This same rope was used on the farm by the work hands every day. They also found samples of his DNA on 10 pieces of Lisa's clothing, both inside and out, as well as all over the crime scene at the barn. Police and the court also found that Nerijus had no alibi for the night of the murder. They believed the motive was of a sexual nature. When investigators raided his home, they found a stash of violent pornography. 1 month after Lisa disappeared, her funeral was finally held and was attended by hundreds of people. Everyone present asked the same question: why? Why this beautiful, talented young woman who was only just beginning her life? Why would anyone want to hurt her? Before Nerijus' trial began, both his brother and wife were cleared of their charges and released, but at his trial, Nerijus proclaimed his innocence, stating that he had never even met Lisa. He claimed his DNA was found on the rope and clothes because he worked on the farm. He could not, however, explain why his semen was found all over the crime scene. The story prosecutors told was a dark one. After becoming enamored with the violent pornography he had been watching, Nereus kidnapped Lisa as she left work and took her to the barn across the street. There, he covered her eyes and mouth with tape before wrapping a rope around her neck. He then pulled the rope over a metal pipe hanging from the ceiling of the barn. In an effort to try to hide what he did, he then took her body to a nearby work shed and stuffed her into a clothes locker. The judge believed the prosecution and found the man guilty. On November 17, 2015, Nereus was sentenced to life in prison and was to be deported back to Lithuania. In early 2017, he won an appeal that reduced his sentence to just 15 years. But luckily, an appellate court decided later that year to reinstate the full life sentence. To reporters, Lisa's family talked of having her hopes and dreams for their daughter dashed when her body was found. Quote, "We had hoped until the last moment that she would be found alive," they stated. They also said that despite this, they somehow still exist in a bubble where they feel as though she could come home any moment. "We cannot understand that Lisa is gone. She had so much to live for," they would say. They could find no comfort in the dreams they once held for her. Lisa loved to travel and had one day hoped to study architecture in Australia. She even kept a map of the world in her room and would place pins in the places that she visited. Now, they would have to try to find peace in the happy moments they shared with her during her short life. They have this one piece of advice to offer every parent. Hug your children often and a lot. You never know when it's too late. Case cracked. We would like to thank Wikipedia, Nuntuis Sweden, Oxygen, The Local, and Expressen, and of course, Christy Arnhart for researching and writing up today's case. Just a terrible story. These stories always get me when we're talking about people so young in life, and especially people that are starting to really kind of test their boundaries a little bit. I mean, this is a young girl that was she wanted to be able to ride her moped to work and home. And even with parents so cautious that they were literally following her on the first trip that they don't follow her, we have tragedy strike. And it's terrible on so many levels. There was another very bizarre twist to all this. 13 days before Lisa disappeared, on May 24th, 2015, a video was uploaded to YouTube that consisted of a countdown. The video was only 11 seconds long and was titled 13. The name of the channel, Lisa Holm. So conspiracy theories began to fly around it, and people were thinking that her killer had actually premeditated the murder and maybe set up this channel showing the exact day that she was to be taken and maybe even a lead to who they were. However, Swedish police claim that this has nothing to do with her murder. It's completely coincidental. Furthermore, they believe that the channel actually had a different name before the murder and that the channel name was changed after the fact to draw views and spread confusion. And being a YouTuber who has changed my channel name in the past, I can tell you it's fairly easy to do. And it does make things look very odd because you could completely rebrand your channel to something different. But if your old videos are still posted there, it looks very confusing. So I took a look at this video for myself. I don't think it's really related to it either. It seems to be promoting a website. Big thank you to PayPal supporters Jennifer Wilson, Kelly Jo from I Am Me, Emma Rostron, and Mark Witt. If you'd like to support the channel, please visit lordandarts.com. There you can sign up for PayPal, sign up for Patreon, or buy merchandise. All of it helps keep me here with limited commercials, and in some cases, like I'm pretty sure with today's video, no commercials. But we have to keep learning about justice and, more importantly, how to keep ourselves and our families safe. So I appreciate all your support in doing that. I'll see you again on Wednesday with a brand new episode of Searchlight right here on the Lord and Arts channel.